So I'm a firm believer that every person who works for a living experiences frustration in their job. At least once. At least once. We all go through periods of time where frustration just hits us. I don't care how much you love your job. I don't care how much you find your job fulfilling. I don't care how much you would, do your job until you drop dead if you could. Everybody experiences those days where you really think about maybe it's time to quit, or maybe it's time to find a different job somewhere else, or maybe it's time to change careers entirely. I'm convinced even that the guy who runs quality control for M&M's and whose whole job is just to taste test M&M's all day long thinks about maybe things would be better for me at Reese's. It is Reese's. It's pretty great. Anyway, I consider myself very blessed to do what I get to do for a living. And I am very grateful for those of you in this room who support me in what I do for a living. But I do have days where I find myself thinking, maybe I'd just be happier if I hung drywall for a living. And then inevitably I have a drywall project to do at home and I go, oh yeah, that's why I don't want to do that. It's pretty quick to figure that out. But we all have those times where frustration just kind of hits us. Maybe it's frustration because you're not making the progress that you thought you should make. Maybe it's frustration because of an annoying coworker. You guys saw Brad on the video. I'm teasing. Maybe it's frustration because something or someone just keeps getting in the way. And no matter how much you try to keep pushing, no matter how much forward momentum you think you should be having, it's just not happening. And it's all because of this some person or something just stops you and resists you and halts everything for you. But what if I told you that it was frustration because of resistance by someone else that would set the wheels in motion for Theodore Roosevelt to become president of the United States? Understand, Teddy Roosevelt had always been interested in politics. It was something that he was passionate about all the way from his days at Harvard. He went to Harvard there to study law, to eventually become a lawyer. He was one of the top students in the entirety of his class. But there was something about the political field that just called to him. And so even though it would have meant giving up a very lucrative career as a lawyer, Teddy Roosevelt instead chose to go the political path. But in May of 1895, Teddy Roosevelt would be sworn into a job that seemingly doesn't make sense for a person who is on a path of lifelong political field. He was sworn in as the commissioner of the New York City Police Department. That seems like a strange career change, doesn't it? At this point in time, Teddy had already been an alderman for the state of New York. He had gone and had a couple of jobs in Washington, not elected positions, but positions nonetheless that would ultimately help him get elected elsewhere. And he had failed run as the mayor of New York City, but he was sworn in as the police commissioner for the New York City Police Department. And that seemed like such a strange transition, and it seemed like really poor timing to actually become a New York City police commissioner, because it was a time when being associated with the NYPD was not exactly a good thing for you. About 4 months beforehand, a committee set by the New York State Senate, had published their findings of widespread corruption within the police department. They pointed out things like bribery, glad-handing, failure to enforce law, and even election tampering by police officers in the NYPD. This was not a great place to be associated with in May of 1895. And yet Teddy Roosevelt, the staunch rule follower himself, set out that he was going to be the one that would create correction and reestablish the reputation of the NYPD, the once great police department. He would be the one to bring it back to its former glory. Thing of it is, even though Teddy Roosevelt was sworn in as a commissioner of the New York City Police Department, this was at a time where there were actually 4 police commissioners for New York City. The other 3 commissioners included James Avery, not James Avery. Where am I at? This is why you read your notes ahead of time, Brandon. Avery Andrews, a man by the name of Andrew Parker, and Frederick Grant, who was the eldest son of Ulysses S. Grant. The four of them were the commissioners throughout the entire state, or the whole city of New York City. Ultimately, this desire to set about a new path for the NYPD, to reestablish their relationship, would result in Teddy Roosevelt himself actually walking in certain precincts in certain days. He wanted to see firsthand the failure of the police department, and so he would go and walk the streets. And if he found things like a saloon that was open on Sunday, he ordered the nearest patrolman to shut it down. If he saw a patrolman who was asleep on the job, he was severely reprimanded, and occasionally he did, witness any sort of bribery taking place from a business owner trying to bribe a police officer, that police officer was fired on the spot. Teddy Roosevelt seemed to be on a path that was going to completely change the trajectory of the NYPD. But whenever you fire somebody within the police department, that usually means that you have now created a vacancy. And a lot of the people who would find themselves no longer employed by the NYPD because of Teddy Roosevelt's efforts were a little higher up than just patrolmen. They would find themselves in positions that were nearly, if always, filled through promotion. And it's here where Teddy Roosevelt would begin to see some resistance in his job. Since there were 4 commissioners of the NYPD, all promotions had to be done by a unanimous decision of all 4 commissioners. If there were a stalemate, or if, say, one of the commissioners just decided, I'm not going to go to the meetings, that would mean that all the promotions would have to be put off until the next meeting a full month later. And here is where Andrew Parker becomes really important to the trajectory of Teddy Roosevelt's life. Andrew Parker decided to make himself a thorn in Teddy's side. He hated Teddy Roosevelt. He saw this ambitious young man and saw the trajectory that he was on, and he thought, I got to put a stop to this by any means necessary. There was even some people who speculate that he was actually himself on the take. And that's why he wanted to put a stop to Teddy Roosevelt and his stuff, because he was worried he would be found out. But how do you stop the trajectory of a fellow police commissioner without looking like a fool yourself? Or how do you stop his trajectory without it seeming obvious that that's what you're doing? Well, Andrew Parker just stopped showing up for the meetings for a year and a half. A year and a half of not being able to promote the positions that Teddy Roosevelt had made empty because of his sweeping reform of the NYPD. A year and a half of people, of frustrations, of raises not being made because those decisions also have to be made by the commissioners. And so the police force that you do have, which is now thinned down, is getting antsy because they're having trouble paying their bills. It created a sense of unease and unrest. And Roosevelt himself, I challenge you to learn a little bit about Teddy Roosevelt. The man just was all about, I'm going to find a solution, and he was going to do whatever he could. He does not sit still with problems very well. And so he did everything that he could to try to get Andrew Parker to get back on his side, to try to get him to come and join him. He took him out for lunches. He praised him in the media, trying to do whatever he could to try to get this guy, just show up to the meeting so we can make some progress here, bud. But Parker kept refusing. He kept coming up with really good excuses. I can't, my gout's acting up. I can't make it today, I've stubbed my toe really hard. Yeah, he's a real piece of work. Finally, after a year and a half of doing everything that he thought possible to try to get Andrew Parker to just make it to a meeting so they could make a decision, so they could hopefully get things back on the right track of making the NYPD what it once was and making the city of New York the safest metropolis the history has ever seen, Teddy found himself frustrated and ready to throw in the towel entirely. And so he wrote his close personal friend Henry Lodge, a man who was important in the incumbent President William McKinley's team. And in that letter, he voiced his frustrations about his current position and happened to mention briefly that if Lodge knew of any openings in the new administration, Roosevelt might find himself interested. This would lead to him being named the Assistant Secretary of Naval Affairs, which for Teddy Roosevelt was a dream job. This is one of the Teddy Roosevelt facts that just blows my mind. When Teddy Roosevelt himself was only about 24, 25 years old, he wrote a book called The Naval War of 1812. Published it, and within 2 years, it was on every naval ship in the Navy. It was being taught in college campuses around the world. Teddy loved the Navy, and so the idea of being made Assistant Secretary of the Naval Officer, that was perfect for him because now he can strengthen the naval office. That position would ultimately lead to him joining up with the cavalry in the Spanish-American War. His heroics in the Spanish-American War would lead him to being elected governor of New York, which would put him above James Avery, or Avery Parker, excuse me. So Andrew Parker, there we go, I found it. Too many A names in that list. The Parker guy, there we go, Barb. I kind of always wondered, they didn't say in the biography that I read, how did Parker feel about Teddy Roosevelt being elected governor? I'd have liked to find out. That'd have been fun. But he would very briefly be the governor of New York because then he was appointed as the vice president in McKinley's second run as president. And if you know anything about McKinley's history, he was only alive for about 3 or 4 months of his second term when he was assassinated, making Teddy Roosevelt the president of the United States within, this blows my mind, 6 years of first being sworn in as commissioner of the police department. Frustration at his job led to within 6 years being made president of the United States. And so now whenever I face frustration in my job, I find myself wondering, is this the frustration that ultimately leads to me being in the White House? And suddenly I don't see those frustrations as all that important anymore. We have this mindset as human beings that whatever thing that we are going to do, whatever path that we are going to take, whatever endeavor we are trying to undertake, we kind of romanticize it in our minds, and we think everything is going to go exactly according to plan. This is going to be perfect. Everything that I'm about to do, I'm putting steps in place that are going to make things better for me and for my family, and it's all going to go off without a hitch, and it's going to be great. I actually experienced this recently this year. I made a decision for my family that was going to help put us on a special path, that was going to help save us money in the long run and therefore make our lives a little more comfortable, and it was going to be great. And then a 17-year-old pulled out in front of me and smashed my car and totaled it. So, changed the plan. But we have this idea that whatever path I'm going to do, it's going to go great, it's going to go perfect, when in the reality, every plan that we make nearly always does not go according to plan. In fact, I would venture a guess that more than half of the things that we plan for ourselves don't come to fruition at all. And we get so frustrated about those things. We get so irritated about those things. And it's especially frustrating when those things are happening outside of ourselves. When those things are happening away from our control. When we have no say over these things happening, it becomes empirically frustrating. Because it leads to us just stalling our plans out entirely, and it makes us think there's no path forward. We even experience this when it comes to sharing our faith. Right? I think a lot of us as Christians, especially young Christians, we have this notion of like, everything about my faith is perfect, and I want to share Jesus with the world. We have the best of intentions in wanting to do so, and new Christians especially, you guys are adorable, because they're just like, I just want to tell everybody about this, right? They're experiencing that spiritual fervor within themselves, and they want everyone to know about it. But then people come along who not only don't want to hear about the gospel, but think it best that others don't hear about the gospel as well. They don't just reject the gospel, they try to do everything they can to bring resistance to the spread of the gospel. I think we have a hard time understanding this mindset, and I think it's understandable why we have a hard time with that, right? We love our faith. I'm assuming that you love Jesus, and that's why you're here today. I don't think anybody was brought here under duress. If so, blink 3 times and I'll see it. Okay? We're here because we love our faith, and so the idea that somebody else doesn't love our faith is hard for us to wrap our minds around. And so these people come along that for whatever reason, their belief is that Christianity as a whole is not just not good for them, it's not good for anyone. And so they try to bring resistance. Understand, they think they're doing the right thing. That's a hard thing for us to grasp, isn't it? They believe that they're doing the right thing by bringing resistance to the gospel itself. And it's not necessarily that mindset that surprises me. I'll tell you what really surprises me is the fact that Christians get so surprised by this. Right? Somebody brings along a little bit of resistance to us, and all of a sudden we as Christians, we start clutching our pearls and we get a case of the vapors because we're worried about, how could this person ever want to stop me from doing this? We don't understand why these people have this in their mindset of why are they trying to resist the gospel? Why are they trying to put a stop to the spread of the love of Jesus Christ in the world that's around us? We get so utterly surprised by this that when resistance brings its way into us trying to share our faith with people, most of the time we just stop entirely. We are so surprised that there is resistance in the world to the name of Jesus that it halts any progress whatsoever because we just simply stop sharing it. But the thing of it is, Jesus repeatedly warned his followers that resistance was going to happen. Not might happen, was going to happen. And more than that, Jesus himself experienced resistance over and over and over again. In Mark 6, where we were last week, we kind of just mentioned briefly the events of 1 through 6. Verses 1 through 6. I probably should have said that word first. We briefly mentioned it. We talked about this notion that Jesus himself went to Nazareth, his hometown, the place where he spent most of his life growing up. And we talked about the idea that he experienced resistance, but we didn't really dive deep into that resistance. And verses 2 and 3 really give us an idea of exactly the reaction that the people of Nazareth had towards the teachings of Jesus. It says, "And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard him were astonished, saying, 'Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joas and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?'" Don't miss this last part. "And they took offense at him." If there's one place in the world that Jesus should have felt comfortable, one place in the world where Jesus should have felt himself free to open his mouth and to share the gospel of what that God has given him, the gospel that he received from his actual Father, it should have been Nazareth. Right? Everybody's comfortable in their hometown, aren't they? Most of the time. Depends on your proximity to your parents most of the time. Spent 4 years doing ministry in my hometown. Mom and Dad were a little too close. I'm kidding, Mom, if you're watching. But that's the thing, is that if there's one place where Jesus should have felt comfortable, it should have been in the town that he had spent most of his life growing up, the place that he called home. He is teaching them wisdom. He is sharing with them the gospel that is given to him through God. And instead of listening to him, they write him off. They write him off entirely. All they can see is the same kid who used to run around and climb trees, the same kid that Mary brought home with her after her time in Bethlehem and in Egypt. The same kid that had always been there, that's all that they can see. And we also need to understand, culturally speaking, that phrase, the son of Mary, that is an insult. In that culture, in that time period, boys especially would be referred to as the son of whoever their father is. I would be the son of Scott, right? If you look at genealogies in the Bible, almost all of them only include the name of the father. So you would always be referred to as the son of your father. By calling Jesus the son of Mary, they are stating, we don't know who your father is. In essence, they are calling Jesus a bastard. This is the kind of insult that kids would use to make other kids feel insecure. This is the same kind of insult that you would use when you really wanted to get a person away from you. Right? And they are asking the questions, where's he getting this stuff from? Isn't this the son of Mary? And they reject it so much that it actually says they took offense at him. They don't want to hear the words of a bastard son of an unwed mother. And so even though it's his hometown, even though it's the place where he grew up, even though these are the people he has known his entire life, he's rejected and sent away. It's not the only place that he would face rejection. Of course, we can talk about the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the teachers of the law, the scribes, the people who were religious leaders of that particular time period. They rejected Jesus at every possible opportunity that they could. Almost from the very beginning of his teaching, Jesus was rejected by these Pharisees and these people. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the healing of the paralytic, right? And when Jesus said, "Your sins are forgiven," we didn't talk about the reaction that was spread throughout there. Because that reaction was essentially, who does this guy think he is? The teachers of the law, the scribes, the Pharisees, in one of his earliest miracles, are offended by what Jesus had to say. And these guys witnessed miracles by Jesus firsthand, and they wrote him off all the time. Can you imagine that? The guy that you've known your entire life, who's been blind every single day of his life, is suddenly able to see, and you're upset because the guy who made him able to see did it on the Sabbath. You're upset because the guy who was able to tell this paralytic man who'd been paralyzed for a long time, whose friends love him so much they cut a hole in the roof to get him in front of Jesus. And you're upset because, well, he said something we didn't like. They write off miracles seen by their own eyes because of the content of what Jesus said. And it got to the point where they not only despised him, they not only undermined him in every chance they could, they looked for ways to get rid of him. In John chapter 8, we're told about the woman who is caught in the act of adultery. And when they bring her in front of Jesus, they say in verses 4 and 5, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" And John includes us in on what they were thinking in the beginning of verse 6. "This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him." They are looking for a way to get rid of Jesus, so much so that they completely and utterly shame a woman, ruining her life because they want to get rid of him. That, if that's not rejection and resistance, then frankly, I don't know what else could be. And as bad as that is, to not only be rejected by your hometown, but to be rejected by the religious leaders of your time, even his own family did not believe him, at least at first. In Mark chapter 3, verse 21, we're told a very short sentence, but this very short sentence tells us so much about the mindset of his family. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, he's out of his mind. It's one thing to have your hometown reject you. It's another thing to have the religious leaders reject you. Your own family? His mom knew who he was. She'd known before she knew she was pregnant. She'd known before the first signs of pregnancy who he is. Surely she would have told his brothers and sisters who he is. Surely she would have clued the rest of the family in, and yet what Jesus has to say is so far-fetched to them that they would rather write him off as being insane. To the point that they tried to take him away. And again, as bad as it is to be rejected in your hometown, as bad as it is to be rejected by religious leaders, and as bad as it is to be rejected by your family, Jesus would face rejection from his own followers. Can you imagine that? The people who at first side up with you, they become your buddies. They want to know more about you. They want to know more about what you got to say. And then one day they're just like, whoa, too much. I got to bail. This is crazy for me. I can't deal with this. In John chapter 8, a little later on from the woman caught in adultery, Jesus does one of the biggest miracles that we still talk about to this day. John chapter 6, not even John chapter 8. He does one of the biggest miracles that we still talk to this day. He feeds thousands of people with what is essentially a small lunch, right? I'm a fat guy. Anytime we talk about food, you have my attention. But we still talk about this particular notion of when Jesus feeds these thousands of people. And even more people start to come back and start to want to not only follow after Jesus, they also want to kind of see that same miracle again. But they start following after him and they start asking him to give them the bread of life. And Jesus tells them in John 6:35, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. We know what he's talking about here, but for them, this was really difficult for them to wrap their minds around. They did not understand it. In fact, we read their response in verses 60 through 66. It says, when many of his disciples heard it, they said, this is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? But Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were grumbling about this, said to them, do you take offense at this? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. This is big. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life, but there are some of you who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who those were who did not believe him and who it was who would betray him. And he said, truly, or this is why I told you, that no one can come to me unless it is granted to him by the Father. This one guts us. After this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. Jesus not only faced the rejection of those following him, he knew ahead of time that they were going to reject him. He knew it. It was fact for him. And that wasn't the only time that followers would reject him. Judas betrayed him. Peter denied him. Thomas doubted him. Even the ones who were closest on hand with Jesus, some of the only 12 that stuck around after this, still found ways to reject him in some way. Now, 2 out of those 3 still came back into the fold. But Jesus faced rejection from those closest to him who were on hand with him 24/7. Everywhere that Jesus went throughout his life and throughout his ministry, Jesus experienced rejection. He encountered people who would reject him, who would try to resist him, even to the point that he knew it was going to happen. In Mark 4, after Jesus uses a parable to explain that there are some who hear the gospel and don't believe, or those who hear the gospel and believe for a short time, but ultimately reject it, he says this really sneaky, important line to us. In verse 9, he says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." That implies that there are people who have ears to hear but aren't listening. People who are present on hand for everything that Jesus is doing and still don't believe in who he is. You and I, we believe that if we were able to witness Jesus firsthand, if we could somehow have a physical, literal Jesus right here next to us, that we could come to our friends and say, "This is Jesus, watch what he can do, and I'm sure you're going to believe." The people of his own time period had Jesus. They could see what Jesus did. And several of them, many of them, still chose not to believe. They still rejected him. They still tried to resist him to the point that they put him on a piece of wood and watched him die, thinking that that would finally stop him. Losers. So if they could reject a physical, literal, living, breathing Jesus, what in the world makes you think that they're not going to reject you? Who am I compared to Jesus? Who are you compared to Jesus? So if they could reject him, you best believe they're going to reject you. You best believe they're going to reject me. And oftentimes it's not going to matter how eloquent we are in our speech, how well we present our case or our argument. You could show people stone cold facts, and they're still not going to believe you. So why in the world are we so surprised when it happens? If Jesus himself expected resistance, then you and I all the more should expect resistance. The gospel is good news for all, but that doesn't mean that all want to hear it. Because the gospel itself is truth. Not your truth, not my truth, ultimate truth. And if there's one thing that this world has shown us over and over and over and over again, is that they will always try to find a way to resist, ignore, dismiss, get rid of, resist and reject ultimate truth. I've even heard people utter the phrase, "I don't care what the truth is." There are always going to be people who reject us. There are always going to be people who resist us. Church, that should not surprise you. And so I can hear you already. I can. Your wheels are turning. You're all thinking the same question. Okay, well then what do I do? What do I do when they reject me? How do I respond to that? How do I react to that? And I'm going to tell you the same thing that I've told you thousands of times. Look at the example of Jesus and do what he did. Right? Because again, back in Mark 6, verse 6, after Jesus is rejected by his hometown, it says he marveled because of their unbelief, and he went about among the villages teaching. Wow, they didn't get it. Hey, you guys over here, let me tell you something. He didn't let it stop him. He was sad, I'm sure. He's like, man, I wish they would have gotten that. Got to move on. When we face rejection as we're trying to share the gospel, even when we face resistance as we try to share the gospel, it should not be the thing that stops us. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. I wish I could tell you that it's not going to happen. I wish I could tell you that every single person that you ever share the gospel with is going to be like, oh yeah, man, I get that. Let me go get baptized right now. Man, that'd be awesome. I wish that was the case. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. I genuinely wish that was the case because I don't want to see anybody go to hell. I consider that phrase to be one of the most insulting things that one person can say to another. Right? In a pantheon of swears that we can give, I consider that one to be one of the worst. But the reality is, there are going to be people who reject it. There are going to be people who try to bring resistance to it. They're not only going to reject it themselves, they're going to try to stop you from telling it to other people. So what do? You keep going. It's awful. It's not a great feeling. Nobody likes to be rejected. Right? I got a history of dating that proves I don't like to be rejected. Fortunately, that one didn't, so... Nobody likes to face rejection, but rejection is going to happen nonetheless, whether you like it or not. You can either wallow in it and allow it to stop you completely, or you can just keep going. Here's what Jesus actually told his disciples to do a little later in later on as he told them to go and share the gospel. He said, and if any place will not receive you, and they will not listen to you when you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. Shake it off, keep going. Right? Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, at the end of verse 22, what we talked about last week, he even told us that we were going to experience some resistance. He said, I have become all things to all people that by all means I might save some. Right? Paul experienced resistance that you and I couldn't even begin to fathom. Right? Everywhere he went, his life was threatened. There's one instance in particular where Paul is literally taken outside of the city, thrown into a pit, and they throw rocks at him until they think he's dead. And I love this about Paul. He gets up, he shakes it off, he goes back into town and says, yeah, but one other thing about Jesus. You and I, somebody says, no, thank you, and we're like, oh, no. And we wallow. Rejection's going to happen, folks. I wish it wouldn't. It's going to happen. But we can't let that stop us. Because if we love people enough that we want to impact more than just their life, if we love people enough, we want to impact their eternity. If we love people enough, we want to impact their forever. Then we cannot let resistance or rejection stop us from trying to share with the ones who we can save. We can't afford to with what's at stake. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to Father who is in heaven.